Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Forum Number 8 in regards to the Neshoba Regional High School building project. My name is Joseph Gleason. I am the chairperson of the Neshoba Regional High School Building Committee. Actually getting a flash flood warning here, excuse me. And again, I'd like to welcome you all to our last public forum before the special town meeting scheduled for September 18th. First order of business for this evening is I would like to take a moment to introduce all of our members of the Neshoba Regional High School Building Committee. Some of them are up here on the dais with me this evening, but we feel it's important that we recognize everyone who has spent the better part of the last 3 years working in furtherance of the construction of a new Neshoba Regional High School here in our district. So let me just introduce each of the members of our committee and tell you a little bit about each one. First, we'll start with the town of Lancaster. And before I do that, I just want to explain how our committee was comprised. We have a committee of 21 individuals. Of the 21 individuals that are on this committee, 15 are what we call voting members. The remaining 6 are our advisory members. The difference between the advisory membership and the voting membership is residency. So the 14 of our 15 voting members are all residents of the district. This was a priority for the Neshoba Regional School District Committee. The 15th member, who is a non-resident, is our superintendent, Kirk Downing. So he also has a vote. The remaining 6 advisory members are non-residents, but they are important to our committee, and I'm going to introduce all of them this evening. So we tried to balance out the number of members from each of our 3 sending communities. So I'm going to start first with the town of Lancaster. My fellow committee members from Lancaster include Mara Bailey, who's an instructor here at Neshoba Regional High School, along with Kim Early, also another instructor here at Neshoba Regional High School, both residents of the town of Lancaster. Tanya Rich, who's the athletic director here at Neshoba Regional High School. Excuse me, she's the athletic director for the Neshoba Regional School District, excuse me. And lastly, I have Mr. Ken Fromer, who's up here on the dais with me this evening. He is one of our construction and building specialists on the committee. Next, we move on to the town of Bolton, where we have Ms. Amy Cohen, who is the co-vice chair of this committee, along with being the vice chair of the Neshoba Regional School District Committee. We also have Mr. Robert Sikansky, who is the chairman of the select board in Bolton. Mr. Sikansky has been a valuable asset to our committee. He has chaired our Owners Project Manager Search Subcommittee. He is currently chairing our Construction Manager Search Committee. And as I said, he's been a valuable asset and contribution to our committee. In addition to that, we have a resident of Bolton, Ms. Stacy Dupuy. And we have one last member from Bolton. As a voting member, we have Mr. David Yesway, who is one of our newer members on the committee. Lastly, we move to Stowe. The first person I would like to introduce from Stowe would be my co-vice chair of the committee and the chairperson of the current Neshoba Regional District Committee, Ms. Leah Viverito. She's sitting down at the end of this table. In addition to that, we have Mr. Dan Nicholson, resident of the town of Stowe, parent or former parent of a student here at the Neshoba Regional High School. We have Ms. Christine Kendall, who is here this evening as well. She brings architectural expertise to our committee. And we have also Mr. Rich Eckel, former member of the Regional School District Committee, and a parent here in the district. And last but not least, we have Mr. Christopher Buck, who is also from Stowe and a member of the Stowe Finance Committee. As for our advisory members, we have first and foremost among them our Assistant Superintendent, Ms. Laura Friend. We have Dr. Kate Boynton, who is the principal here at Neshoba Regional High School. We have Mr. Robert Frieswick, also up here on the dais with us, who is the Director of Facilities. We have Mr. Joe McCarthy from the music department here this evening as well as one of our advisory members. We have Don Lowe, who is the town administrator for the town of Bolton. And last and certainly not least, he's sort of the bookend to our committee. He really holds things together. Unfortunately, he's a little under the weather tonight, but that's our business and operations manager, Mr. Ross Mulcairn. So when we were talking about putting this last forum before the building, before the town meetings together, It was suggested, and I'll give credit where credit is due, by Superintendent Downing that tonight's presentation should be more about the residents of the district, the taxpayers, the parents of the students of the district, hearing not so much from our consultants, but from the members of our committee who live here in the district. I do want to make mention, however, of the fact that this evening we do have two of our consultants with us. We have down the table here Ms. Mary Ann Williams, who is our Owner's Project Manager representative, along with Mr. Joe Milani sitting here to my left, who is from Kessel Booz Associates. I would be remiss if I didn't mention also Ms. Sinuin, who is also with Skanska this evening, and I would like to thank all of them for being here tonight to answer all of your questions. As I said, the format tonight is going to be more about residents of the district talking to residents of the district about the value of this project. And I'm just going to go down through the itinerary very quickly, and then I'm going to pass the microphone down to my left. So the first individual you're going to be hearing from this evening is Mr. Robert Sikansky. He'll be talking about current conditions here at the Neshoba Regional High School. His presentation will be supplemented by our Director of Facilities, Mr. Robert Frieswick. After Mr. Frieswick speaks, you'll hear from our Assistant Superintendent, Ms. Laura Friend, on the educational programming for the district, after which you will hear from Superintendent Downing on the MSBA, the Massachusetts School Building Authority processes. You'll then hear from Mr. Ken Fromer on the feasibility study aspect of this project. Kristen Kendall from Stowe will then speak to some of the concepts attendant to the design. Then we'll come back to Mr. Downing because Mr. Mulcairn, again, is under the weather. He'll speak to the finances attendant to this project. And then last but certainly not least, you'll hear from our chairperson of the Regional School District Committee, Ms. Leah Viverito, who will speak to you about the recent vote of the district committee to incur debt to fund this project, after which we'll come back to me to close out, and then we will have some questions. So you know that Dr. Boynton is here. She's going to be monitoring the chat. She will be posing any questions that come through us on the chat. When we do get to the question and answer portion of this forum, we would like to do it in sort of town meeting style. You don't have to give us your address, but it'd be appropriate and I think nice if you just give us your name and you can pose your question to any of us here on the dais with regards to this matter. We would, however, like to keep questions regarding this project focused on this project and what's going to be happening a week from tonight. We had our tours over the weekend. We got a lot of questions, and some of the questions were a little bit outside of the scope of this project. So for the purposes of this evening, if we could ask you kindly keep the questions focused solely on this particular project and any of the matters attended there too. So without further ado, we'll move on to the first slide. And this is a pretty simple slide. It basically just advises us as to the overall costs of this project. So right now you'll see on the slide that the total cost that the district committee, or the total amount that the district committee of the Neshoba Regional School District is seeking authority to secure is $714,926. So you understand, this is not necessarily the cost of the project. This is the cap upon which we're seeking to secure funding approval. It is our hope and it is our belief, and perhaps somewhere along the line, Ms. Williams and Mr. Milani can speak a little bit more to this, that we expect and hope that the cost of this project will be somewhat less than this particular amount. This is simply a cap that we're looking to secure. With regards to the Mass School Building Authority, they have agreed as of August 30th, 2023, in a unanimous vote, to fund this project or to contribute to this project the sum of $64,793,451. As I mentioned, that vote was taken on the 30th of August. It was a unanimous vote of the Board of Directors, and that is what we can expect to cap out as far as their contribution to this project. So doing the quick math, as you can see, the total taxpayer contribution for this project will be $176,921,475. And Superintendent Downing will speak more to the actual contributions of each of our sending communities during this presentation. And without further ado, I would like to turn it over to my colleague, Mr. Sikansky, to speak to the issues of current conditions.
Thank you, Mr. Gleason. Good evening. I was a member of the Space Study Task Force that was formed in late 2013. We issued our final report in, I would say it was March of 2016. And the focus of that report was to see what the space constraints were and the physical characteristics of the current building, how they were affecting the education and the curriculum of Neshoba High School. So we didn't look at the conditions of windows. We did not look at the conditions of walls. We were interested in how the physical plant affected the education process. Several of the things we discovered are that the science labs, and this has been going on for a long time, are outdated, not conducive to a modern curriculum. What that specifically means is that we have two vents in many of the labs in order to do the kind of physics or chemistry or biology work where you have to exhaust gases or have some kind of combustion. And it restrains the extent of the program that you can offer under those conditions. The science labs are also small, so it's difficult. The school as a whole is arranged, it was built in 1960. It was arranged for someone and designed for someone to stand in front of a classroom, tell the students what they needed to know, for the students to write it down, learn it, and keep it in order to pass the grade. The kind of collaboration that we're seeing in many educational programs and in colleges and in high schools across the country is very limited in the current high school because of the small classroom size. That's true most especially in the science labs, but it's true for all across the curriculum, whether you're in English or arts, the wellness courses. The small classroom sizes affect the breadth of the curriculum that the teachers can offer. Similarly, we don't have any specialized spaces for various courses. These would be special, more extensive biology or chemistry courses, computer science courses, arts courses, very limited. Some of them don't have natural light. There's only one kiln in the whole building. We cannot recycle the clay that's used, so on and so forth, things like that. No special spaces for journalism and wellness. We have limited resources in privacy and student support areas. Sometimes the only barrier between a student who's having an issue and is in discussion with a teacher or a counselor and someone else who's in there for a different reason, it's just a curtain between them, not a physical door or a wall or anything like that. Again, it's a space limitation. The spaces are too few and too small. There are inadequate facilities for weight training and physical therapy. I don't know if you're familiar with what's called the cage in the gym. It's about the size of this stage, given where the curtain is to the front, and that's where all the weight training goes. It was a converted part of the gym. The physical therapy often takes place in the hallways if there's more than a couple students that need treatment at any particular time. Ventilation issues are an issue in the locker rooms. Again, there's insufficient space for private meetings and interviews. The largest conference room in the high school, I think, holds 10 people. And heating and ventilation problems in various areas of the school are a distraction to the students. So these are some of the issues. The full report that we issued, again, we came out in 2016. It's still available, 41 pages. It's still available on the Neshoba Regional School District website. Next slide, please. The New England Association of Schools and Colleges, or NEASC, is the organization responsible for certifying that high schools throughout New England are providing the kind of curriculum that the students deserve. They do every 10 years, they go to a high school and you have to renew your accreditation. There's a 5-year checkup in between, but basically every 10 years, they go do a thorough review of the high school. They did their last one in 2015, which was sort of in the middle of when the Space Needs Group was working. And their conclusions are as follows. This is from their report. The Neshoba Regional High School facility is adequate and sufficiently maintained to support the delivery of school programs and services. However, the facility requires updating to support the needs of the 21st century. I'd like to read to you another portion from that report. It's on page 55 of that report, and that is that as a follow-up to their recommendations, the school district should, quote, develop and implement short and long-term plans to ensure that the Neshoba physical plant will be supportive of effective instructional practice, end of quote. The short-term programs or plans are the ones that are being put in place now. How much can the teachers do with the space that they have? The long-term plans, they were aware of the Space Needs Program, the study that was being made. The long-term plans are what this vote next week is all about, providing a comprehensive solution to the issues of a broad curriculum and an adequate curriculum for the students. In addition to which, the school doesn't have the science labs. It was in 2012, the Massachusetts school, the MSBA, recognized that the science labs were inadequate, and at that time offered to pay for some portion of their renovation. That was turned down at town meetings as being a piecemeal approach to all the issues at the high school. Following that, the Space Needs Group was formed to provide a comprehensive overview, which is what led to us tonight. Another recommendation coming out of the Space Needs Committee was that the district should submit a statement of interest to the MSBA for a comprehensive review and plan to address all the issues at the high school. So also, going back to the screen, the lack of physical lab space, reduced the number of science courses offered with additional lab periods. And what that means in practice is the number of labs that the students are oversubscribed for the number of labs available. So there's 4-credit labs, 3-credit labs, 2-credit labs, 1-credit labs. And many people who want to take a 4-credit lab can't because there's not the adequate teaching resources. So they have to take a 3-credit lab. Some 3-credit people get bumped down to 2, and some 2-credit people get bumped down to 1, and some 1-credit people who wanted 1 credit get bumped down to just, you have to take a regular science class without a lab. Next slide, please. So once again, in December 2015, the task force voted to recommend to the school committee that they apply to the MSBA for what's called submit a statement of interest on behalf of a comprehensive review and improvement to the Neshoba Regional High School. That SOI was finally submitted for the first time in 2018, and it was initially rejected by the MSBA with a message of please come back and apply again next year. Your chances will be better. We did apply the following year and were accepted into the program. And here we are as the result of those decisions. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Rob Frieswick. I'm the Director of Facilities for the Neshoba Regional School District. A lot of people here tonight were at the tours on Saturday. A lot of the things that I'm going to talk about tonight were talked about on Saturday. The building's life and safety system is at or is exceeded its life expectancy. The smoke and heat detectors are obsolete and are costly to replace through third-party vendors, and that's just for reconditioned units. All the sprinkler heads are over 20 years old and are due for replacement or UL testing to determine their functionality. The fire pump in the pump house is at the end of its useful life and needs to be replaced. Many areas of the building are starting to see corroded sprinkler piping that could lead to leaking and or flooding if they break. Current conditions of some of the roofing areas, you can see in some of the pictures, the asphalt shingles are starting to deteriorate. Some of the roof is ponding due to insufficient insulation underneath it, and also some of the gypsum roof decking has had some water damage over the years and is just starting to deteriorate. Exterior walls in the building have precast window sections. Those solid precast wall modules have thermal bridging and no vapor barrier. So, on hot days like we had last week, there's no thermal break, and the heat just, radiates and just comes right into the building, making it very difficult to maintain cool and even warm temperatures in the wintertime. As you can see in some of the pictures, there's cracking in the concrete at the exterior of the building. Some of the concrete's starting to spall and fall off the building. You can see some of the rebar that's started to be exposed on areas of the building the concrete is starting to fall apart. Exterior doors and windows. Doors, as many of you saw over the weekend, are starting to rot at the bottom. The steel frame, single glazing, the aluminum frame, insulated glazing, and translucent plastic sandwich panels there's no thermal break there, and it lets a lot of heat in and out of the building. As you can see in the next slide, there's some structural steel. The connections that were made, it's insufficient, and that would have to be addressed. You can see some of the concrete precast panels where the steel beams carry the load from the building. You can see that it's starting to crack. One of the pictures, you can see the truss system in the middle section of the building isn't supporting the roof appropriately because it's not falling onto the beams. The drinking water well is actually inside the building here at Neshoba Regional High School. The water gets pumped from the well into the pump house on the east side of the football field, gets pressurized, and then brought back into the building. That well is a non-conforming well through DEP because in relation to the oil tank that is outside of the well, where the well is, and also parking lots, ball fields, and things like that. Universal accessibility here at the high school is an issue. The signage isn't up to code. The lift on the turf field is not functioning. It needs to be replaced. You can see some of the coral risers that do not have ramp access. And a lot of the ramps, especially here in the auditorium and other places in the building, are too steep to meet ADA compliance. A lot of the science labs do not have the casework that meets the code for ADA accessibility.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us this evening. It really is an honor to join you as a Neshoba educator who's been in the district for a long time and one who's deeply committed to our students and our families. So thank you for joining us this evening. As Mr. Sikansy indicated, our current building is a product of 1961, and it's served us well. It really has. But the reality is that teaching and learning has transformed immensely since then. And the needs of our students are different. Back then, you move to the next slide, Bridget? Back then, you can see that our classrooms were structured with desks and rows, and we had a chalkboard, and the role of the teacher was to impart knowledge to students. Times are different. Now we have knowledge in our pockets and on our desktops and even on our wrists. And the role of an educator is different. No longer imparting knowledge to students, but creating learning experiences for students so that they can use that knowledge to be creators and problem solvers and flexible thinkers to be able to communicate and succeed on truly a global landscape. With our new project our new proposed project, we offer a different vision for learning. Our new project proposes flexible spaces where students and teachers to come together to collaborate and create and innovate through project-based learning and signature programming that's going to bring disciplines together and not exist in silos, as is the case of our current classrooms, where we're limited with the ability to bring students together because of the fixed nature of our classroom spaces. Our new building looks to bring together students from different disciplines, the sciences and the humanities. It looks to engage our students with high-tech science labs and the latest in technology, fine and performing arts and robotics, even EMT training and a preschool environment on campus. So our proposed new high school is about brick and mortar, but it's really creating the space that our students need to be learners in the 21st century. Learners who are ready for the current world and the future that we don't even know exists yet. Our goal is to provide our students with opportunities to create and problem solve and create together as one learning community and not in individual classrooms and isolated silos that our current building provides.
Hello, I'm Kirk Downing, Superintendent of the Neshoba Regional School District. Thank you for coming out tonight. I would be remiss if I didn't notify all of you out there that this presentation, the slides of this, are posted on our school building project website. That's where you can access them. And I know that this is being recorded and can be seen on Bolton Access Television and our local access television networks. So I want to talk a minute about the Massachusetts School Building Authority and the role that they play in this project. As Mr. Skansky told you earlier, the school district voted to engage with the MSBA to examine through the feasibility process what we need to do to solve the problems that we saw with our aging building. This is a conversation that did not come upon us suddenly. It has been going on for many years, of which Mr. Skansky participated in early. But I can say this school district did solicit help with the science labs as early as 2012 with the MSBA. And our towns elected not to move forward with that project at that time. So here we find ourselves today, where in 2018 we made our first statement of interest to the MSBA, and that statement of interest was ultimately declined. Next. In 2019, we resubmitted that interest, and in only the second submission, the MSBA determined that our project was significant enough that we leapfrogged the line of many school systems that were already in the queue for MSBA support. In that particular year, there were a total of 144 statements of interest submitted to the MSBA. We know 61 of those statements were around core program from 51 districts. Only 11 districts were selected to participate or potentially receive grant funding from the MSBA that particular year. Neshoba was one of those districts. So in that, the MSBA grant program identified issues with the building facility and the educational inadequacy. This is cited by the MSBA. I won't go into detail of that in this slide, as you've already heard this in summary from Mr. Sikansky, Mr. Frieswick, and Ms. Friend, outlining the inadequacies of not only just the physical plant of the building, but in prohibiting us to deliver the kind of educational program that the students of our towns deserve. There's been a lot of conversation about the MSBA reimbursement rate that I would like to put out and clarify. The MSBA is a grant program. It's a quasi-governmental agency that receives 1 penny on every 6.9% sales tax, and that's how it's funded. And they have to take their pool of funds and distribute them to the school systems all across the district. And so when your base rate is determined, and that's based upon the equalized total evaluation of your towns, they give you a base rate. And our base rate at the initial onset of discussions was set at 49.53%. Now that base rate is only to participate in areas of the project. It is not a percentage of the total cost of the project. And along the way, we have opportunities to earn points or credits to raise that base rate. I'm happy to tell you all here tonight that after the assessing our physical plant, the MSBA determined that we would get 1.56 percentage points of credit based upon how well our custodial staff has taken care of this building over the years, and recognizing that the issues with our building is typical of an aging building, not a lack of performance by our custodial staff. That was a very gracious credit that was given to us by the MSBA. We also are very happy to say our base rate was increased for the 4% energy efficient green schools credit, and I'm going to get into that more in the following slides. Now, as I explained to you, the base rate is just on the areas of which the MSBA will participate. They also have other limitations or controls that they can use to control their budgets to be able to spread funds across school projects in the Commonwealth. And those controls come in the form of caps. Some of the caps are very specific to areas. For instance, this auditorium space would be capped at seating for 660 students? 610. Excuse me, 610 students, people in the theater. And the stage, under the MSBA reimbursement guidelines, would be about the size of the stage at Hale Middle School. Well, we know that that stage is not sufficient for an educational program at a high school that also supports other community programming. So in the staging, we did increase square footage in order to support the current program that we offer and look toward the future. But the most impactful reduction in the rate to what is known as the effective rate comes in the square footage cap. The MSBA will participate no more than $393 per foot of the project. When we entered into this process in our first submission in 2018, that was the same year Attleboro High School was awarded their program to participate with the MSBA. And at that time, that cap was $333. Well, I don't think I have to explain all the events that have happened over the last 5 years that have caused inflation in our economy, particularly in the construction sector. But the cost of constructing a building from that time has nearly doubled. And the increase in that cap has only increased by $60 a square foot, less than 20%. So when costs double at 100% and the reimbursement of square footage only increases at 20%, you can see the squeeze that happened. Nobody could have predicted those events. The town meetings were held in the spring of 2020, and then in June of 2020 approved the feasibility study. And even at that time, as inflation was beginning to rise dramatically at that moment, that was past the point of when we engaged into this process. As a result, the MSBA's what we call the effective rate is at 20% of the project. Now, what I do want to come into is that we're very lucky here in Neshoba, and that we would be the first school in the Commonwealth to build under the MSBA's new Green Schools policy. Coming into the project, and frankly, after the vote was conducted to incur debt, or excuse me, at the school building committee to recommend that, it was only a 2% reimbursement. The MSBA changed their guidelines and allowed a 4-point credit, of which they reached out to the Neshoba school district and said, we will allow you to resubmit that number in order to get that 4% credit. So we were happy to come back, and that did not raise the total cost of the project. It was frankly a product of the efforts that were already built into the building to achieve that 4% credit were underway. So there are minimum requirements to meet that Green Schools policy, and they're based on LEED standards. And currently, in our plans, we are a LEED's Silver project. and that leads silver designation is what earns us the 4% credit on the reimbursement. And with an opportunity to have even a higher rating, but the MSBA does limit this cap to 4%. So we got the maximum of what the MSBA will offer regarding the green schools policy. And at this point, I would like to turn it to Mr. Ken Former to talk to you about the feasibility process.
Good evening. Can you hear me? Okay. My name is Ken Fromer. I'm a resident of Lancaster. I've been in the construction industry in both residential and commercial construction for over 27 years. That doesn't include the time growing up. I helped my parents restore our house in Lancaster, so I have even a little bit more than that. I'm a Neshoba graduate along with my wife Jennifer, and we recently put all three of our students, the last two, our children graduated this spring. So we've got a family of Neshoba graduates, but no more in the pipeline, at least for quite a few years. One of the first things we did as a subcommittee was we looked at, once we had the architect and the owner's project manager on board, we had to review all the different options that were available to us. As you can see on this screen here, we narrowed it down to, kind of a short list of 7 options that took into account all the different items, whether it was option 1 being the base repair, what ended up being option 3A, our addition to the existing facilities and renovation, and our 4 series addressed what would new construction look like. Option 1 is the base repair. This is what a lot of people seem to be asking about, is what if we just repair what we have? One of the biggest things we learned very early on in this process was that all those repairs would come up to a cost of roughly 110 to 120 million, of which 0% of that was going to be reimbursed by the state through the MSBA program. What's also important about this is, while that base bid repair addresses a lot of the needs of the school, whether it's the roof, HVAC, all those types of issues, it doesn't solve the biggest problem, which is the school program, and how does this school fit into, and how does the existing building fit into the school program. We then looked at trying to keep some of what we have. There were renovations done early on, so we looked at, okay, what happens if we try and keep the good parts of the school, the parts that can be still worked with. What we found out after doing several different studies and iterations of, even going 3 stories in some places, is this was going to be the most expensive option of all the options that we looked at. Not only was it going to be expensive, it was going to take longer than what we ultimately proposed. Basically, the fact that we were, most of you have done renovations to your home and you're just interrupting your daily lives. We would have to have things like temporary classrooms, all those things that we would have to do to make sure we could still keep the building up and running while we were trying to do a massive renovation. So that's why it ended up that it was going to take several additional years and be a major disruption to the students of the district. We had a lot of different options that we considered under option 4, whether it was put it where the football field is, put it on the back of the site where some of the other fields were, and just different parts. I'll just take one step back. Part of the process was to determine if the current property that we have was the right solution and right place for the building, so we did look at other options. Ultimately, we decided that because we already owned the land, so we decided that the current parcel was the right place to put it. Anything we did outside of using this property would have been all that cost to acquire whatever land it was would have to be 100% paid for by the towns, and it would also have to be acquired before we could kind of take the next step. So Based on the central location of Neshoba as it is, it really, became a no-brainer that this is the right place for it. So how do we now fit a new building on? And as you can see here, some of the options were eliminated basically just because they don't work. We have the Tennessee gas line that runs the backside of the property, so crossing that, we can do some limited crossing, but to put a building on the other side of the school was just not going to work. Ultimately, we landed on option 4D, and that really, kind of checked all the boxes in what we were trying to do. It was the most cost-effective for providing a new facility that met the programming, and it was going to take the least amount of time and be the least amount of impact on the students and the district. No matter what we're doing, we're working on this site, so there inevitably will be some disruption to the students, but in this option and as we've gone through the process, we're really working to try and keep any of those disruptions to a minimum. And that's ultimately how we landed on option 4D, new construction.
Thank you, Ken. So as mentioned earlier, I'm Chris Kendall. I'm a Stowe community member, but I am also a mom of young kids in the district in 1st and 4th grade, and I'm an architect with nearly 17 years experience, probably closer to 20 at this point, and I work in the K through 12 public school market sector. So I have a lot of experience, and I'm trying to bring that expertise as a community member representative to this community to ensure that our interests are really represented and brought back to our design and OPM team. So the first step of this process was the visioning sessions, which really pulled information from our district, our staff, and our community to get a better understanding of what we're looking for in a new high school that represents everything we want for our students and our community to meet our educational needs. That bubble diagram that created a hub of student commons or dining, as well as our media commons, which is sort of a more robust idea of a library these days, is really sort of that central node to the school. That bubble diagram was used to create multiple iterations of floor plans that were presented to the working group and the building committee, and all of those were constant iterations with our feedback in order to develop a plan that best represented those early ideas of what we wanted our school to be. What that became was a sort of two-story academic wing connected by that hub of a student commons dining media center to our community core. That allows us to not only safely and securely separate our academic wing off hours, but it creates this nice node, a really flexible dynamic space that connects into our community core, our auditorium, our athletics, our media commons, that allows this building to not only function to its highest point for our students, but also for our community after hours. This is one of the views that were developed during this stage of the game, the early schematic design level of what that student commons is. It's a really advanced thought of a redevelopment of what a dining hall is. No longer is it just a room tucked away in a portion of the building, but it becomes a dynamic double height space that gives many opportunities for seating arrangements. No longer are students just at rows of tables, but they can create different groupings that meet the social and emotional needs of our students, as well as a flexible, dynamic location that connects to our auditorium, our media commons, and really utilizes this space in a flexible, efficient way. Our corridors within the building, within that academic core, are open, wider corridors that create vision cores through the building, so our students and our staff and our teachers can see each other, see and be seen, feel comfortable. Our high school is the first location that all of our students from our 3 different towns are really coming together. Creating these open, dynamic, collaborative corridors encourages that interdisciplinary and that grouping and allowing our students to meet each other in our different towns. It's a really impactful, exciting part of our district. In addition to our sort of interior component, the architects really brought back to us ideas of what the exterior of this building will be. What is the character that we're trying to develop here? They brought multiple options and different precedent studies that responded not only to current design ideas, but also pulling from the context of our three communities. And what the committee responded to were ideas of a sort of modern take on traditional buildings, maybe using traditional materials in a more modern proportion. So these are just different precedents that sort of inspired where the design went to. So you can see here how some of those materials are being brought together and those proportions are put into the building. So some of these material ideas are also looking at not just, sort of what they look like and feel like, but trying to consider being cost effective, durable. And when I say cost effective, I don't just mean initial costs, I mean long-term costs. What are the life cycle costs? Are we gonna have to save a penny now only to have that compound and we're gonna be replacing it or maintaining it and spending all that money down the road, but finding that nice balance between it. And this is just another view of how all of those components are coming together to create this welcoming and dynamic school for our community and our students. And I'm gonna hand it back to Superintendent Downing.
Thank you, Ms. Kendall. So that brings us back to Attorney Gleason's opening of the total project cost. And we've presented, we've done this presentation, I think, now on 12 different occasions in the last 3 weeks to select boards, finance committees, capital planning committees, council on agings, and the Neshoba Rotary. And the total estimated project cost, as you see, is north of 241 millions. Again, that is the not to exceed number. That does not mean that will be at the very end of the project, the cost of the project. The maximum reimbursement from the MSBA would be $64,000, and that is if we reach that maximum number of 241 with, did I say 1,000? I'm gonna back that up right now. MSBA reimbursement of $64,793,451. So you see the total taxpayer contribution would come out to $176,921,475. The portion per town essentially breaks down up by thirds, but this is outlined in the regional agreement based upon students enrolled from each town at Neshoba Regional High School. In just this past fiscal year, Bolton had 31.87%, Lancaster 32.97%, and Stowe 35.16%. That's a dynamic number that changes year to year based upon the population that each town sends in Neshoba Regional High School. But historically, they've hovered around the third. So these proportions in terms of dollars are related to just the FY22 enrollment numbers. So when bonding the project, there's multiple methodologies, and in not getting into the depth of those methodologies tonight, I will say that our Finance and Operations Director, Mr. Ross Mulcairn, is meeting with a bond advisory committee. That committee is made up of Mr. Mulcairn, myself, the 3 town administrators or their representative, a representative from each of the town finance committees as well. When it comes to ultimately the bonding strategy, we are not going solo on this. We are working with our residents that participate on those governmental boards to determine the best strategy. And ultimately, there are rules around bonding. You have to, when you bond money, you have to spend it within a window of time relative to what the estimated cash that is needed for the project. So our committee is talking about a step-up process ultimately, where a portion of the project is funded initially, and then when we get to the point of construction where the next phase of funding needs to happen, we would draw at that time. The example that you would have here now is an example of if the entire project were funded at one time. So if that were the case, you can see it's based off of the median residential assessments of each town, and the dollar amounts in Bolton, Lancaster, and Stowe for the year, the month, the week, and the day. I'll thank our folks that have provided some feedback on, please express it in multiple ways so we can just see relationally what that would look like based upon finances from household to household. So you can see in the town of Bolton, the per year numbers would be 1,550 to 1,750. In Lancaster, the yearly number would be 1,150 to 1,350. The Stowe number, 1,300 to 1,500. That is based on the assumptions of a 30-year municipal bond of 4% to 4.5%. And that's based upon what current 30-year municipal bond rates are going out with, like ratings as the Neshoba Regional School District. And with that, I will turn it to the chair of our school committee and resident, Ms. Leah Viverito.
Hi, everyone. Leah Viverito, resident of Stowe and also chair of the school committee. Professionally, I'm also a high school educator with about 25 years of experience. So I'd like to walk you through the timeline that we are looking at. As you can see, the Neshoba Regional School Committee voted unanimously to incur debt for this project, which is what Mass General Law requires. When we own the building, the school committee is the one that, or the school district is the one that incurs the debt. So that occurred on August 2nd, 2023. I just wanted to make a quick note that that marks a 10-year span from the beginnings of this process. And so from the time we started studying this with the Space Study Task Force all the way up into incurring the debt, it's been 10 years. And then if this project were to go forward, we're looking at additional years beyond that. So this process is definitely a long one. And if we were to vote no, we would ultimately be setting ourselves up for another 15-year run. We probably wouldn't see this project come back through to fruition for another 15 years. So on October 30th, we were happy to hear that and this was no surprise really because we work so closely with the MSBA, but the Board of Directors unanimously voted to approve the project funding agreement that people have laid out for us here for the construction of a Neshoba Regional High School, a new one. On September 18th, you're probably aware that all 3 towns have agreed to sync up their town meetings, and those will occur seeking an affirmative vote from the towns to approve the school committee's incurring of the debt. All 3 towns must vote yes. On September 23rd, Stowe will hold a ballot question I'm sorry, can you correct me, where is that election being held? At Centers? At Center School. So that vote is happening on a Saturday to avoid interruption of school that day because the building is not really conducive to that. And that is why Bolton and Lancaster, because they can hold the ballot question election during the school day on the 25th, they will hold theirs. And so again, we need all 3 communities to vote yes. And the last thing that I'll say is there ultimately is no vote. No matter what happens over the next week and a half, 2 weeks, there's no doubt in anyone's mind that this building needs a tremendous amount of work. And so whether or not we are paying for a brand new facility or a base repair or something that brings the building up to code, there is definitely going to be millions and millions of dollars that enter onto our warrants over the next couple of years. And so our communities are at the point now where the building is past its useful life, and it really does need to be remedied. I think just looking to your left and right and the ramps that you can see not being ADA compliant, I'm not completely sure how those get fixed. So there are various elements to the base repair that need to be conducted, and we'll be looking to that in the year to come if the vote is to fail, which we hope it does not. I'm going to pass it back over to Superintendent Downing for our conclusion. Or should Joe?
Thank you. Thank you very much for your attention this evening. I know this forum has gone on about an hour, so I'll try and be very brief in my closing remarks. Let me just get back to my chair, please. So I want to just follow up. I'm sorry. Oh. Okay. Sorry. I just want to follow up a little bit on what Chairperson Viverito was talking about as far as the elections are coming up next week. And let me just sort of explain a little further some of the dynamics attendant to what will be transpiring in the next few weeks. So When you're dealing with the MSBA, everything is geared towards their timing standards, their tracks. And we sort of link those to the general laws of our Commonwealth. So right now, when you look at both the general laws and the regulations of the Mass School Building Authority, we're in this sort of situation now where the vote to incur debt was taken, and it was passed unanimously upon recommendation of the building committee unanimously on August 2nd. That starts the clock running. We can begin to incur debt after 60 days from the 2nd of August. So our timing for the upcoming elections put the elections on the 23rd and the 25th. If we are successful on those 2 dates, October 1st is the 60th day from August 1st, and that's the earliest that we can begin to incur debt and start this project. So our OPM has sort of guided us through all of these timing standards and has geared us to begin this process as quickly and as soon as possible in order to save this district money. In addition to that, we also look at the date of August 30th, which was the date that the MSBA Board of Directors voted unanimously to approve entry into a project scope and budget agreement with this district. Once that vote was taken, we are now on the clock. We have 120 days from August 30th, which is December 28th, 2023, to secure the approvals of our 3 sending communities. Now, if on the 18th, 1, 2, or all 3 of our communities vote this down, there's a couple things that's going to happen. One is the elections will still go forward on the 23rd and the 25th. The vote will not be binding because there'll be no authorization to incur debt, but just so you understand, if there's any questions out there, it's like, why are we going forward with an election if the town meeting voted this down? By statute, they're required to still hold the election. So what will happen if one of our 3 communities votes this down? We have some time and some remedial avenues, but they're very limited. What will happen at that point is that the district you can either do one of 2 things. You can either have a second vote within that 120-day period, or the district itself can stage its own district-wide election in support or in opposition to this project. Bottom line is that if we are unable within 120 days from August 30th, 2023, to secure the approval of our 3 sending communities, and by the way, just so you understand, the MSBA process is basically a 2-pronged test. They look at each district and they say, look, these are the 2 prongs of the test that you have to meet. One is need. We've already met that, and I think we've met that with bells on. I think that the district was allowed to enter into this process after our 2nd application cycle. I think the MSBA has recognized right from our 1st cycle that this was a district in serious need of a remediated high school. The second part of that of that test is community readiness. They demand that your communities fully support these projects. If you are unable to secure community support for this, what has happened is very simple. There's an old adage, I think, from Ben Franklin that said the 2 things you can count on in life are death and taxes. Well, if Mr. Franklin were here today, there'd be 3 things you can count on. One is death, second is taxes, and if you can't get community support for this, you're going to be removed from the MSBA pipeline forthwith. And once we're removed from the pipeline, and that's what the term they use. They like to, I like to use the term funding process, but they call it the pipeline. Once we're removed from that, there is no telling where we go from there. For those of you who are here over the weekend, and for those of you who are at the recent select board meeting in Lancaster, forgive me because I'm going to repeat myself, but prior to getting to the vote on August 30th, the board of directors of the MSBA took up the matter of, there were 2 communities. One in particular piqued the interests of myself, Dr. Boynton, Superintendent Downing, and Ms. Williams and Mr. Olson, and that has to do with the Dudley-Charlton School District. On August 30th, before they got to our vote, the superintendent of schools for Dudley had the inimitable task of presenting himself before the MSBA Board of Directors seeking leave to withdraw from the funding process for the simple reason that they could not secure the approval of the town of Dudley to proceed with the remediation or reconstruction of their high school. I bring it to your attention because what transpired on the 30th was two things. One, we kind of listened to a superintendent who was really down on this. You could hear it in his voice. But what more importantly was the reaction of the MSBA Board of Directors, which was nothing. Secretary Goldberg expressed the regret, said she didn't like to see this, and she moved them aside and moved the agenda. Once we're out, and we're going to forfeit $64.7 million in contribution from the state. Once we're out, we're in a land of uncertainty. I call it the MSBA purgatory. And I've also used an example of the town of Andover. Now, as I want to be clear about this, each town that presents before the MSBA presents different from the other. Every town has its own qualifying and disqualifying characteristics. There's no suggestion here tonight that the Neshoba Regional School District presents the same as Dudley, Massachusetts, nor does it present the same as Andover. Andover has other disqualifying characteristics that have led to their problems with the MSBA. But Andover is a cautionary tale because Andover, as of November 2022, received its 10th rejection notice from its 10th application cycle. Andover is now in the inevitable position of having to fund the construction of a new high school on their own, and they're looking at the early 2030s before they can even start on this. So the concern for me as the chair, and I hope the concern of all my members and our constituency, is that once we're out, we don't know when we're going to get back in. The other thing to consider is that if we are out of the MSBA pipeline funding process and we have to reapply, we start from the beginning, and that means we have to start again with a feasibility study. And if we have to start again with a feasibility study, then we're not going to be able to secure reimbursement for that because they've already provided reimbursement for this feasibility study module. So it becomes a really difficult task for our district if we reject the MSBA partnership in this regard. And in closing, I just want to say that I hope that what happens on the 18th, the 23rd, the 25th is positive because I really do believe this is a seize the moment opportunity, a carpe diem moment for our district. It would be great if we could bring a school to this district that is LEED certified, that is ABA compliant, that is compliant with the rules and regulations of the MIAA. But most importantly, and as Ms. Kendall touched on it, we spent 3 days in a visioning process last year. And what came out of that visioning process was one particular concept that was of highest priority to those members of our visioning team, and that was equity and inclusion. A new school will bring what we hope will be a welcoming and educationally profitable environment for all of our students, particularly those students who are most educationally vulnerable, for our children who have spectrum disorder, for our children who are mobilely challenged. I mean, talking to Mr. Milani regarding ABA requirements, he said, you know, you look around here, as Ms. Viverito touched on, we have ramps in this auditorium that are not ADA compliant. We have bathrooms that are not ADA compliant. We have ramps that don't have guardrails for our wheelchair-bound students. This is a great opportunity for our district, and I am cautiously optimistic that we will all embrace these concepts next Monday, and we'll pass this. We will pass the warrant articles swimmingly. So, without further ado, I'd like to open it up to questions. Again, we're going to do this town meeting style. If you could just come up, give us your name, and direct your question to me, and we will direct you to the individual on this dais who can best respond to your questions. Come up to the microphone, please.
How you doing? Dave Murphy from Lancaster, Massachusetts. Good presentation, by the way. I'm going to mainly ask a couple of quick questions about the money end of things. First of all, this is a bond issue. A lot of people, at least where I live, seem to think that this is a tax increase based on assessment. Am I correct that this is going to be a fixed price per household? Let's just use the number $1,300.
This is outlined in the regional agreement between our 3 towns. It is based on assessment year over year.
The assessment, but you said the range is for Lancaster, I believe, $1,150 to $1,350. That doesn't really cover the range of the $200,000 house versus the $4 million McMansion. So
Yes,
the
that
bottom
num-
assessment would be $1150 for the little old lady living in the $200,000 cottage?
It is based on on this slide here, when presenting these ranges, it's based on the median residential assessment. So that's provided by the town. So the median residential assessment in Lancaster is, $456,209 a home. So we don't have the whole range of homes, but it's just based off of that value of that home and a 4 to 4.5% bonding rate for the whole
Correct.
project.
But the low end of that, the $1150, would be what the little old lady and the $200,000 house would pay. Is that correct?
No, that is not correct. It's, the assessment rates are based on each town's rate per $1,000. So, or per, what is it, Bob, per 100,000? Or it's per 1,000 to
So
ultimately the
you're
rate is. So
saying
no.
that this range would be based on the assessed value of the town, of the
So,
house?
so for a home that is assessed at say half the rate of the median residential assessment, their increase per year would be about half of what that displayed increase
Okay,
is.
so there is a lower end lower than the $1150 that you're,
Yes,
Okay,
yes, that
just-
range is just based off of that singular assessment.
okay. Second question, is this just the debt service for the life of the bond that you are paying for now? For example, what happens to the bond in 30 years? Does that still have to be paid off in full?
There are limitations to this. We can take no more than a 30-year bond, so yes, it would have to be paid off in 30 years.
So when I'm 97, you're going to be coming back to me for the money to pay off the bond after we've serviced the debt for 30 years? I'm just asking, is that correct?
No, we wouldn't be doing that. On a 30-year bond, it's like a mortgage. Once you've reached the end of that bonding period, you're done.
Okay, so answered those two questions. Final note, you've done a great job at presenting, and I don't mean to be sarcastic as to why a Mercedes is better than a 20-year-old Dodge. And I love new schools. I've built 2 of them. This looks like a fun project. But, you know, I'm speaking out of concern for the senior citizens, especially in Lancaster. We just got off at a 2.5 override, and an additional tax increase is going to really hurt people. So I'm just speaking for that group of people. You know, for the upwardly mobile, 40-year-old with 5 kids, this is a great idea. But I'd like to voice for the people that don't have kids, that are 70, 80 years old. I think this is really going to hurt them. Okay, thank you very much.
Hi, Kathy Markham of Bolton. And just by way of background, I've been a Chief Science and Technology Officer for Fortune 500 companies. I also recruit for MIT. And so the science program and the conditions of the labs, it's very important to me. So before I ask my question, I'm saying that because the rest of my question doesn't sound as enthusiastic. I want to know a couple things. I pulled the data. First of all, the price was shocking to me, and I think probably was shocking to a lot of people. That the number was just shocking. So I pulled data to look at, well, what's so high, right? And the building cost per square foot is way up, which you guys said, but our cost per student here, where we don't have near as many students as in Arlington or a Waltham or some of the others, is really high. So I'm wondering, the budget number, which you're showing to 9 significant digits, which is amusing, the budget number, if it goes above that, what is the plan for people? And why is the cost per student so high? And is there extra square foot in there that really is not going towards education, but is going to something much softer, some kind of feeling or whatever? Because as a person who's built a lot of labs for a major corporation, I hate that stuff. Extra space, big old corridors and all this stuff, I want to see labs, I want to see education. Those are the things I want to pay for, not something, that part that looks kind of like a shopping mall.
Okay.
So there's 2 questions in there.
I'll try and answer as best I
Okay.
can for you. The number that we've come up with is the cap that the state has agreed upon. what's going to happen is, as the process continues, we've already interviewed 5 different contractors. We're going to eventually enter into what's called a GMP, a guaranteed maximum price. So that is going to be, at the end of the day, is going to be less than that number. So that's the number that the contractor will work towards, and we come into a final agreement with that. So it's our position, our goal to bring that number in lower. In developing that number, there's things, allowances and contingencies in that number to prevent against going over. There's contingencies in there for cost inflation. There's just a lot of, safeties in there. And during that process, we have to try and find a balance of those things to not have too many contingencies, but have the right amount. And we feel that number ultimately has the right amount of contingencies in there. As far as the square footage of the building, I'm going to use rough numbers, but we're roughly 200,000 square feet, of which there's, and Kirk had the actual number, I just did it on the, well, there is less than 5% of that square footage that is not allowed to be reimbursed. So it was some square footage in the technology area, in the auditorium, in a room, and in the offices. So, and the PE spaces. So basically, we've maximized what the state will allow us so that we can get as much bang for our buck. There has been a lot of questions out there onto all these open spaces. What are they? Well, they're circulation areas. They're the biggest area, and Kristen will speak to that.
Do you want to?
Yeah, no, go ahead.
So just as far as the design, and I want to state this, that I do this every day. By no means are we trying to say, like, let's make a big fluffy building with lots of circulation space and try to a lot of unreimbursable square footage. But that circulation space, and the reason why it's important, and the fact that there's collaboration in it, is that it's also functional. This goes above and beyond just what kids are doing in a classroom. It's busting out of those science labs, those classrooms, and learning and education is taking part in these open, flexible spaces, in the corridors, in the student commons. It's the way students learn now is not the way we learned as kids. And all of those spaces are functional. There's not a bunch of fluff space in here. Anything that looks like it's circulation, it's almost doing double duty. Everything is extremely tight and extremely functional. And as this continues on, yes, maybe it can get squeezed and get tighter, and that's all part of the value engineering process that will happen further down the road. But as Ken was mentioning, that this cap is meant to be the safe, it's not going to exceed here. Because once this is approved, we can't go back and ask for more money. We can keep coming down, but we can't add to it.
So what will you do, scope reduction?
Some of it will be potentially one of the biggest ways you can cut is some square footage reduction. That will be part of it. You'll look at the building materials. What we will always try to mitigate with the design team and the OPM is to limit the impact on the quality and the educational performance. We want to still, meeting the curriculum and the educational for the building is the top priority.
I can add just a little bit more to that as well. Part of the process with going with this, the CM at risk is what we're doing right now is the contractor is basically engaging with us to help find areas where we can save money in value engineering. And then it's also in their subcontractor procurement, trying to find the correct subcontractors at the best market prices. So there's it's an evolutionary process, but it's always focused on how do we save as much money as possible so we can always build our contingency. We don't want to, in my world, I hate using a contingency. I hate using any of that stuff. I always want to try and build that. How do I build that? And how do I do it through buyout, through value engineering? And just in the discussions with all the 5 different contractors that we did speak with and interviewed, they were all very comfortable in, with our budget and how we've set it. And they've already started, they had notes of, okay, here's where we think it can already come down. So that's the next step in the process of trying to figure that out. One other thing that Kirk mentioned that he'll correct me when I'm wrong, building to building, roughly they're over 200,000 square feet, the new building versus what we have here today. In the new building, there's about 65,000 square feet of kind of that core mechanical space, hallways, corridors. In the building that we have now, there's 75,000 square feet. So we're actually a much more efficient building using all those different spaces. 38 to 31%. So hopefully that answers.
I was just going to add that part of what we do now in estimation and all of this, it's a little bit like, looking into a crystal ball, using the best expertise, using the best information that we have now in order to develop these numbers of the max cost that it's going to be. And as Ken mentioned, we're trying to do that in the safest way possible. So we're not over guessing, we're not under guessing. And part of that is escalation. The past 5 years has shown that escalation has gone up at an insane rate, something that's completely unprecedented. And we're protecting that in the estimate that we have now. What we're seeing, though, in the market, and as bids are starting to come in, is that certain trades are starting to level out. They're starting to stabilize. So hopefully what we're owning in escalation, we aren't going to hit. And that will all be savings and money that come back so we don't hit this maximum cost that the bond is protecting.
Hi, Joe Milani with Castle Booze. Just to look into your statement about science labs real briefly. The MSBA, when you go to them with a project like this, they have an established format for the different classrooms and different types of rooms they'll allow in the school based on the population of the school. It comes out to a certain amount of classrooms, a certain amount of science labs, a certain amount of music rooms, that sort of thing. For Neshoba, they originally had stated that for this population we would be allowed 8 science classrooms. Based on the heavy science-based curriculum at Neshoba, we quickly realized that they needed 10 classrooms. We petitioned the MSBA and they came back with an approval to add 2 additional science classrooms to the project based on the need that we had for the curriculum in the school. The MSBA also has a requirement that you have to have classrooms utilized 85%. They don't want to have classrooms sitting idly empty during the day. And so we have to justify, and we go through quite a long process to do this with them over the period of the design. We have to justify that our classrooms will be utilized at least 85% of the time, 5 out of 7 periods a day, so that we're sure that those classrooms aren't going to be empty and they're just not fluff space. Also, as Superintendent Downing said, that right now we're at a 31% rate for our, it's called gross space, the spaces that around the building are left over, the corridors, the storage rooms, the mechanical spaces, things like that, bathrooms. You're allowed by the MSBA to limit that to 33% of the total area of the building. Really difficult to do, especially in a high school. But we are below that. The building is extremely efficient at the moment. We hope to make the building more efficient as we go through the next phase, which will be design development and then into construction documents. And as Ken said, during that period of time, the construction manager that's on board also helps us by reviewing the documents and the program to try and make the building even more cost-effective than it is. So we hope to come out of this in the end with a very cost-effective, a very efficient building that truly meets the curriculum requirements of the district, and we'll do that for a period of 30 years in the future.
No, I just want to make sure you didn't have anything further to add. Yes, I was just going to ask calling Dr. Boynton.
Thank you. Is this on? Yeah.
Yes.
Right. I have questions from 3 residents. Carolyn Weller asked for a little more information about the reimbursement rate from 50% to 25%. I think that's a question that she has. Why did it drop? And based on the 25% reimbursement rate, has the group considered scaling back the design?
The actual effective reimbursement rate is actually 26.8%. Kirk, I don't know, do we want to have Mary Ann respond to this question? Because Mary Ann was, she had given a pretty extensive presentation at one of the forums on the reimbursement rate. So Mary Ann can speak better to this than I can.
Thank you. Good evening. So there's something to understand just in general about the Massachusetts Building Authority is that their program, when they talk about what's your reimbursement rate, it's based on what they call eligible costs. So if you look at the square footage in the building, they will tell you what's eligible and what's not. So for example, if you said we want a swimming pool, that would be an ineligible cost. So there's two different categories. You have square footage that is eligible, but they have caps. And so this is where we get into the impact on the rate considerations. So for example, the building cost, just the building itself, forget the site work, et cetera, forget the architect, the OPM, fixtures, furniture, equipment, that has a cap of $393 per square foot. Whatever the value of that building cost is, then there's another cap for site work. They say, well, if your building cost is, X dollars, then we'll cap up to 10% of what that value is. So they have a series of various caps there. So it's a site cap is 10% of the building cost. The building cost is capped at $393 per square foot. Fixtures, furniture, equipment, and technology is capped at $2,400. We know we typically see it coming in between $4,000 to $4,500 per student for that. And then there's other miscellaneous caps on design fees, the OPM, and square footage caps. So what we're trying to point to here, I think the good news is that there's 199,000 and change square feet that was deemed eligible. But whatever that cost is, when you start applying all these caps, that is why you get an effective rate. I know it's kind of confusing to try and explain math, but in terms of their spreadsheet and formulas and all the calculations, because you change one number and the square footage, it starts to impact all the other categories.
I'll try and kind of sum it up. The state's not going to pay for everything, and they're not going to pay for every part of the project. So they say, okay, you're going to have a project and it's going to cost X dollars. But of that, they're only going to pay for a certain portion of that. It doesn't include all of the site work, all of the other fees, the building permit, FF&E, all these other things. So the state just says, we're not going to cover that. So that's how you get with the two different rates. They're not, we can't pick or choose, but it's the 50% roughly is of what they're going to actually pay for, what they're willing to pay for, and then that translates to the 26% of the overall project. That's as simple as I've been able to wrap my head around it. I know it does get confusing. And I think the other question about the size of the building is there's a program, and these guys go through a huge amount of effort to say how many square feet the building needs to be for the classrooms, all those different things. We really can't cut it down any further, and the biggest thing that I go back to is the roughly 200,000 square feet, and that's what they're going to allow us to get money back for, is that 200. And we've only exceeded that by an additional 4.8 percentage of square foot. So it's like 10,000 square feet. So we're at the right size and based on what our program needs.
And I just want to add, when you see this 55 and it comes down to 28, you're thinking, what the heck? Why did that drop? I just want to say a testament that this happens. This isn't unique to Neshoba Regional. This isn't unique to the team or to the design. This is typical for every single district in the pipeline at MSBA. Every town and every district has a starting point whether it be 50-something or 40-something or 60-something, and they almost across the board, it drops down to their actual reimbursable rate is about 50% of that starting number. That's the way the process goes. All of those caps that Marianne described lead into that, but it happens to everybody. I don't want, just to underline the fact that it's not something unique, it's not something the team did wrong or we aren't being efficient enough. It's how the process works. It's disappointing, it's confusing for the community to understand, but it is extremely typical, and we're actually a little above the 50%. So I think, the team is doing everything it can.
I have questions from 2 more residents, no more in the chat so far. Austin Matthews asked, students attending NRHS from 2024 to 28 will experience disruptions. What formal commitments will be made by the project managers and construction firms to prevent and mitigate disruption for these students? Thinking here particularly of noise that can interfere with productivity and concentration. Follow up, what formal process would be in place for reporting grievances should those commitments not be honored?
I can't speak yet to the formal grievances part of that, but I keep going back to, we just had all these interviews with the contractors, and part of what they did in their presentation was explain how are they going to manage their site to not interrupt or to impact the school as little as possible. And they all had very great ideas, whether it's how they manage a traffic flow in and out. And we call it enabling phases and different phases of the whole project. So they all laid this out, and everyone's a little bit different. And the plan will be finalized as part of, the next few months is bringing on the contractor, and that will. But it's very important to us, and that was one of the main questions we asked all of them. How are you going to deal with the site? How are you going to deal with an active school next to an active construction project? Insofar as we asked, one of the questions I kept asking is, how many workers do you anticipate having as maximum? They all had an answer for that, and then we said, where are you going to park? What's your plan? So they already started thinking of that, so it wasn't impacting the school. It's an evolutionary process, but it will happen, and they were all committed to making sure that the community was engaged in that process. So there was always notification of what was going on within the project.
I will finish answering that question by saying, in terms of grievances, having had experienced this in a previous school system, we had an area on our website where those grievances could be expressed, and even direct communication to the superintendent at NRSD email address. And there are weekly construction meetings, of which all those are brought up, as well as those reviews are taken at the school building committee if they need to be addressed.
I want you guys to all know that I think 6 of your school committee members have children who are in the high school. And so we will be intimately aware of how this is going, and we pledge to make that a priority.
Thank you. Following up on what Ken said, every contractor that we interviewed in the past couple of weeks has said that they will have a separate entrance to their construction project, regardless of what part of the yard, what part of the property they're working on. They will have a separate entrance to that from where the buses and the parents and anybody else who's attending the school will have in place. They're going to put up fencing along the entire perimeter of whatever area they are working in at a particular time. And where it is, the new building is going to be close to the current building, they will be putting up a covered pathway to prevent anyone. It's going to be necessary to walk between the buildings. You have to have it just for fire safety reasons, but that's all going to be a covered walkway. So they are well aware of this. They do a great deal of, they all lead their presentations with how safe they are. But those are 3 examples of the specific things that they've described in terms of not affecting the current operation of the school. Their goal is to not affect the operation of the current school.
Just to conclude, we just finished a project like this in Attleboro High School. That new school was built separate on the same site, on the baseball field, actually, just like here. The separation between the schools allowed the construction to happen of the new school without disrupting the operations in the existing school. The same thing will happen here. There's no renovations happening within the existing school that will cause disruption. All the work is happening on the new school separate. There is no temporary demolition or preliminary demolition that has to happen in the existing school to make space for the new school. One is constructed and the other one is torn down. We are within probably 30 feet of the existing building with the design as it is right now. In Attleboro, we're even closer than that. We did have a form that was online that we would review complaints that came in, and they were dealt with immediately. So I don't think there's really, but they weren't really complaints of students causing disruption. It was people parking on my street, or the truck went down my street and it dumped a load of rocks or something like that. It wasn't student complaints. We had almost no student complaints from anything in that construction.
All right, I'm going to take one last question from Dr. Boynton, and then I'll get right over to you, sir. So go ahead, Dr.
One
Boynton.
final resident question from Nancy Arsenal. Hang on, I need my reading glasses. Should we anticipate future funding requests for temporary structures like modulars, plus 2 years of sporting events taking place at other campuses, which I assume we would have to rent and pay for?
I'll answer part of that. I don't anticipate that we would need any modulars during this this project. And we've discussed at the district committee level the issue of potential disruption. Unfortunately, some sacrifices do have to be made relative to this project, and that will be unfortunately the baseball team, because the baseball field will not be available during this project. We will be looking for alternative sites. But I'll turn it over to Superintendent Downing for anything further on this.
Thank you, Chair Gleason. You're exactly right. The building would occupy what is currently our baseball field, so we'd relocate that. All other fields, particularly the main athletic complex, will not be bothered. In the two upper fields where students were playing soccer today, will continue to be available, as well as the softball field will continue to be available throughout the project. There'll be a temporary disruption to tennis, but there's some plans in the relocation of the old courts that are just outside the auditorium to be converted into new courts over by the by the water treatment building that'll also then be reconstructed and converted as tennis and pickleball courts as well.
Thank you. Andrew Martin from Stowe. You made a great presentation, a lot of compelling thoughts. Also, I have a couple of thoughts and a couple of questions. I do want to correct a kind of a half-truth here. This school was originally constructed in 1961. The addition was put on about 1972, I believe. And the renovations in this auditorium here were built in the early 2000s. I couldn't tell you exactly what year. My understanding is, and correct me if I'm wrong, that we're still paying for this auditorium. Is that correct?
That is correct.
How many more years?
I believe it's, wish Mr. Mulcairn was here. It comes off in the next couple years.
Uh-huh. Okay. I say this tongue-in-cheek a little bit, okay, but for a lot of really smart people, I think you're completely out of your minds, okay? In that, my explanation for that is $115 million to renovate is a long ways from $176 million that it's going to cost the district to build this new school. And the $176 isn't the real cost, because we're all paying tax money into that fund that everybody's pulling out of. I think it's a crime that we want to tear down the whole school, personally, from the perspective of sustainability of our environment, just to level the building when we could rebuild it and fix it. And the idea that, who tears down their house after 40, 50, 60 years? Anybody here? I sure don't. I should mention that I went to Neshoba Regional, my cousins went to Neshoba Regional, and my kids, all four of them, have gone to Neshoba Regional. So I think it's a good school, and I've been very pleased with it overall. But again, 115 million more or less to renovate soup to nuts versus 176 million is a big difference. You stated 110 to 120 million for renovation.
That's not a new renovation. That's purely bandaging the existing building. No educational components.
Oh, okay. Well, but I think it fixes the science labs, isn't that correct?
No, it doesn't. It fixes the roof, the windows, you can't see.
Hold on, Kristen, hold on. I want everyone to hear this, so.
I just wanted to be clear, the base repair does not touch any educational space. It purely brings the building up to code and fixes the infrastructure. All it does is that. It's a Band-Aid. It kicks, and I don't even want to say it kicks a can down the road. It kicks a snowball down a mountain. It's going to cost us millions of dollars to then cost us even more further down the road. And I do like your analogy of, do you renovate, do you tear down your house? No, but if I told you that it was going to cost 50 to 100% of your house's worth to renovate, and it was going to take you years, you might consider moving.
I did it.
But not everyone does. That you're in a small, more people would see that amount of repair and damage to a home, that still they're going to spend almost 100% of the cost of their home, they might move. I think it's a lot, and I just wanted to be very clear that the base repair is purely a Band-Aid to our existing building.
Well, that's one heck of a Band-Aid, is all I can say.
Agreed, which is why it's not the recommendation.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, going back to the work I did on the Space Needs Committee, the renovation, simply renovating or bringing it up to code, repair, doesn't do anything to address any of the educational curriculum issues in here, okay? And let me add that should someone bring to a town meeting the idea of let's spend $120 million to repair the high school, everyone who thinks the academic program needs improvement is going to be against it. And for that reason, I believe that a simple repair process would never get off the ground in these three towns.
Yeah, sir, excuse me, sir. Let me just do this, okay? We announced at the beginning of the meeting that we were going to do this town meeting style, so I will definitely come back to you, but I want to recognize this young lady here and Mr. Vizek after that. So, ma'am, go ahead. You have the microphone.
My name is Mary York, and I live in Stowe. I have 3 sons, one who's graduated and 2 who are in the high school. I went to this high school, as did my husband, many, many years ago. And I am a current science teacher in Wayland that built a new building maybe 12 years ago. And my first question is, because one of the things I think bothers me the most about this building as it is, and it bothered me when I was here, and it bothers my kids, is the number of classroom spaces that have no natural light. And there are amazing teachers who, I don't know how they do it. They've taught their whole career here in a tiny classroom with no natural light all day long. And as it gets harder and harder to attract teachers, I can tell you that the building I'm very lucky to work in, we've been able to steal teachers, fabulous teachers from other districts. We just stole a guy from Framingham, and he's an incredible English teacher, and he's also a volleyball coach. And he talked about our building as being a major reason. And it's only one part of it. I am astounded by the costs as well, and my boys will not reap the benefits of this building. But I also, I have another thing I want to ask. So I want to know, my question is, in the new building, how many classrooms, or an estimate, or what percentage of classrooms have no natural light? And I also want to know, I missed how big the new auditorium is compared to here, this one right here, because having a decent sized auditorium, it enables you to hold school-wide events during the day, and you can have your whole, either half or your whole student body if it's large enough. In Wayland, we can fit just over half of our student body in in the auditorium, and so we have a lot of performances, like our musical performances during the day, during special scheduled times, like we have something called Winter Week, and it allows us to do that so that all the students get to see the musical talents of the students. All the kids get to see some theatrical talents rather than everything having to be after school. So, so my question is how big is the proposed new auditorium, and whether or not you have classrooms with no natural light?
I'll give that to Mr. Milani.
Firstly, the auditorium. The auditorium itself seats about the same quantity of people as here. The population in the school is 925, and the new auditorium will seat about 616 people, so it's more than half of the population of the school. However, as Superintendent Downing was saying, the allowance by the MSBA for the support spaces, the stage, the backstage stuff, the music rooms and stuff like that, are very small on the MSBA template. And we've increased those so that we have an actual functional music and arts program that can be run in the auditorium. In terms of classrooms without natural light, there are no classrooms without natural light in the school. None. Zero. There are interior rooms. They're, I hate to say, teacher offices, bathrooms. We try to limit the interior spaces that have no natural light to support spaces that don't have students and teaching activities in them. But there are interior rooms, but they're not any classroom spaces. All 30 classrooms have windows.
Thank you. Mr. Reza, go ahead.
Yes, I'm Roy Rezak from Lancaster. First of all, my thanks to all of you volunteers who have put so much time and effort into this project and the work you've done over the years. Also, my thanks to the professionals who have taken very good care of this building. I was impressed with the tour that I went through. Yes, I see the aging infrastructure, but I see what you have done to take care of it and do the best you can with 60-year-old systems and that kind of thing. When I listen to your proposals and your projections and these types of things and what you want to accomplish, one of the feelings that comes across is, this sounds really nice. It sounds very good if we had the money. And the issue for many in Lancaster is the if we had the money problem is very big. The $58 million you're asking for as what the debt is really is $103 million we have to pay for. And those are the numbers that come directly from, from what you've developed. So it's quite a bit bigger number. It is a massive number compared to, it's 4 times our annual budget. Many people are saying, wow. It's huge. And when you look at what families have faced relative to inflation, the tax increase we had to pay in Lancaster last year, people are looking at that saying, how do we pay for that? And when I hear some of the reasons for why we need to do things, why you need to do this, when I was here for the tour, I was hoping I would find a smoking gun. The gymnasium ceiling is about to cave in and it's going to take off 2/3 of the building and we got to fix it. Wow, that would have been great. I mean, we all understand that and you've got us. Just as a point, and I understand it's one of the items on your list, but when I saw one of the issues you were trying to address was because there was high humidity in the team locker rooms. As a former basketball player, my thought is, of course there's high humidity in the team locker rooms. Okay, that's the way it is. I don't think you can solve that problem completely. I agree it may be overly done and that kind of thing, but it's a very low reason in terms of our thinking, in terms of why we should spend $103 million. What I'm asking for is, what are the top reasons that in your minds justify the town of Lancaster paying $103 million, the town families coming up with the additional at the median price okay, an extra $1,250, dollars per year. What are the top reasons to justify that? Because you need to communicate that. Otherwise, this feels like, okay, a very big, open-spaced, resort that's being built. And that's the problem you're going to face. So it's a question of explain why. What are the key reasons? What are the top 5? Okay, or something like that. Because otherwise, people are going to say, you're paying for fluff. You're asking us to pay for fluff.
Yeah, I mean, you're not paying for fluff. One of my, you're not. When you look at what you're doing is you're actually putting some of the reasons that started the initial process, and it's through that whole process we've found all the other deficiencies, the structural things. So you're pointing to one issue that maybe started the ball rolling, but in the whole course we found all these other issues. I'm a resident of Lancaster. I certainly do not want to pay any more taxes. My children are now out of the school district. But I think what's been important to me throughout this process is I do not want to make mistakes that we've made as towns and district in the past. I do not want to continue the same cycle of, and I even go back to look at some of the renovations that were done. Were those Band-Aids that now we're still paying for that did not solve the problems? And that hurts. It hurts because we can't put it into a plan that makes the most economical sense. So when I looked at this, I said, how am I going to be benefited as a taxpayer to get the most out of my dollars? Mm-hmm. And it was making sure that we met the needs of the students and the school program. That's why the base repairs went off the table very quickly. The fact that they were extremely expensive, they did not solve all the problems, and we didn't get any money from the state. So for me to have voted for that would just be kicking down the can down the road to my son, who in a couple years I hope to be a resident again and have his children. I don't want anyone coming back to me and saying, well, wait a minute, you guys just did this 20 years ago and now you're asking for more money. I don't want to do that. I want to do it right the first time. And unfortunately, this is our first time at this. We've now gotten through it. So whatever happened in the past, and we cannot change that. But we can learn from that and move forward, learn from the mistakes that have been made, and not make them again. That's why it's, in my opinion, critical to vote yes, so we do not make the same mistakes again.
Okay, I think you have to help people in Lancaster understand why spending for them $103 million is the right thing to do, because at some point, I understand that, cost efficiency. Sometimes if you put more money into a project, you can get different systems and you get better returns and that kind of thing. But, at some point, I can't afford to get that kind of return.
Right.
And that's what people are concerned about. And to some extent, I think someone's mentioned the phrase, kick the can down the road. Talked to some people recently who it sounds like that's what they want to do, because they're trying to duck this because it's a huge cost that they just can't afford.
Snowball down the mountain.
The snowball down the mountain. Okay, it's a similar phrase. Okay, I think what we need some really clear, key, must-do kinds of things to help justify the $103 million. Otherwise, what you're going to get is, well, let's do something cheaper for 10 years, 20 years, and we'll reevaluate.
It's never going to be cheaper.
Can we put it on slide 21? Is that possible? So I think that this is actually the slide that Kirk said he wasn't going to read, but it is perhaps an important slide to note. To the left, you guys can see all of the structural deficiencies that the existing conditions report and the MSBA have identified. So replacing the roof alone is millions of dollars. Replacing the windows, which absolutely needs to be done, millions of dollars because they are structurally integral to the concrete walls. Replacing the HVAC system or retrofitting this building is going to be millions of dollars, and all of it needs to be done. I don't know if any of your kids, I don't know how many people have kids in the high school right now, but I know that my kids have to wear gloves and coats in some of their classrooms. They have to then remove all of those things in other classrooms, especially when they go to the locker room. So we have all of those issues on the left-hand side that have been identified. Then on the right-hand side, what you have are things that are near and dear to my heart as an educator, and those are all of the deficiencies of the building for 21st century learning. And that's not fluff, because kids are, we have the percentage of science-based professionals in our 3 towns is, I think, moving toward 50%. 50% of us work in the science fields. And our children are probably inclined to go in the same direction. This building cannot meet those needs. Those kids are going to start choicing out. The problem with that then becomes every single kid we send to Minuteman, which is a fantastic school, but it forces our kids to go on a bus for an hour each way to get to that school, is $42,000. The cost to educate a kid here in Neshoba High School is $17,000. So if we can keep more of those kids here, we keep that state funding here in Neshoba, and we don't send money to Minuteman that is currently on a wait list. And so we also keep charter school tuitions down. We help families not send their kids to private schools to get those educational benefits of a new building. And so there are all kinds of things that will assist over time to every Lancaster resident. In addition, if we were to say no, none of the problems that I just listed that are on this slide are going away. That bill is going to need to be paid. They're going to land on the warrants over the next 10 years, and the MSBA is going to want nothing to do with us. We will be in a similar situation where we're having to fund a brand new high school on our own, tripling the cost potentially, because in 5 years' time, nobody's going to tell me that 174 isn't a bargain. The numbers in our economy are escalating. Inflation is happening. I will be very surprised if the numbers ever go back down to the number that Waltham is paying, which is $400 million currently, for a school that is bigger than ours. So it's hard to make comparisons between schools that were funded prior to the pandemic and locked in those numbers, like Assabet. Assabet renovation locked in 12 years ago. Those numbers are not comparable. So I would just say to our residents that although this number is eye-widening, we all agree, it's eye-widening, it is a good deal for Neshoba. You just said yourself, you have a bunch of people sitting at this table. I also see other school committee members and dedicated workers for this district in the room. All of us are trying to do what is absolutely best for our kids with the shortest dollar, because none of us want our taxes to be raised. Every single person up here is trying to do the right thing by the taxpayers and our children.
Sir, do you want to ask a question? I'm good. The question was answered what the school population is currently. Thank you. Whoever answered that along the way.
Kirk wants to answer that question. He loves that question.
My name is Alice Romer, and I live in Bolton. And I went on the tour last Saturday, and one of the things that Mr. Freswick pointed out was that some of the windows in the building contained hazardous material, and so they would have to be they have to be tested and whatever. How much is it going to cost to demolish this building? And has that amount been added into?
Yes, it's all part of the overall project, and part of that, it's a soup to nuts, thing. When we're done and that budget's done, it's a new school, everything's new. All the abatement of this building is taken care of in the last kind of phase, and then so that is all part of the overall budget.
As well as all the site work.
Yep.
It's all part of that package.
Hi, good evening. Good evening. My name is Mike Horish. I'm a resident of Bolton. I'm a public educator. I have been a science teacher for 19 years, chemistry and earth science. And while I am a school committee member, I'm speaking on behalf, I'm speaking as a resident, not as a school committee member, with an authentic question, with a genuine question. While I'm in full support of the project, I think it's really important to hear the concerns coming from particularly our older residents, and how the funding of this project is going to create financial hardships. I think that's a very hard truth that I appreciate that it's been brought up multiple times this evening. And I think it's incumbent upon the district and the towns to come up with creative ways to mitigate these costs if possible. To that end, as a homeowner who has dabbled a little bit in construction, I know that in order to allow for the construction, it requires permitting, and permitting values are based on the size of the construction project. So my question is, do the costs that were presented earlier include permitting costs? What are the permitting costs? And is there a possibility to reduce those permitting costs in order to pass those savings down to the residents so that the impact is lessened? I'll take my answer back here. Thank you.
And I think Bob will want to speak to this, but yes, the permit is part of the cost, and it's roughly $2 million, but that is all factored into this, and that is to the town of Bolton, so I'll let Bob answer.
Hi, the permitting, the reason I get to answer this one is I'm on the Board of Selectmen, or the Select Board in Bolton. The Bolton Select Board has established a scheduling permitting fee schedule, and it's a permitting fee schedule that applies to all the projects that are in town. It doesn't matter if it's the school or, we've got another large project at 580 Main Street. But at the current time, there's the fee structure has been established long before this project started, and I expect it will be maintained that way.
Go ahead, sir.
David Millette, Lancaster resident. So, is it true that if people were to try and do the base repair, that it would not bring the school into ADA compliance, into the American for Disabilities Act compliance? And I have like a sub-question about the classroom sizes, which is one of the knocks on the present school. Do the classroom sizes need to be increased to make the school compliant with the ADA?
I'm going to give that to Superintendent Downing and Ms. Williams to answer.
I'm going to look to Mr. Malani for a little help here once we get there. But it just in terms of the classroom sizes, our typical classrooms are 725 to 750 square feet, and the minimum requirement there for MSBA participation is 850 square feet. So we have class size standards of 24 to 1 here, and our current class size standards to maintain what is appropriate learning space, we would have to put limitations of 20 students per room on those classrooms in order to even come close to delivering an educational program. We can't change the size of the classrooms. We just can't. Renovation was not even an option unto us because of the support structure of the beams and the infrastructure of the building, and the walls of those interior classrooms are concrete brick. And so they support the roofing structure of the building. They can't be changed, which is why renovation was taken out of the equation. We consider deeply addition renovation because, as our resident pointed out earlier, this space was built around the year 2000. The addition renovation space, if we were to keep these areas that are most recently addressed and then did a renovation around it, that project would have been $25 million more than a new school. So those are some limitations that are upon us. In terms of the ADA compliance issues, I'll Ms. Kendall.
The base repair would address the ADA compliancy to the extent that it's possible within the building. As far as the classroom, ADA compliancy now requires that there's at least one desk in every room, so furniture would need to be addressed in order to have that. We would have to revise all, depending on the doors in the building, do they have the push-pull clearance, all of that. Bathrooms would have to be readdressed if there's not the compliance stalls. There might need to be a reduction in the fixtures, and then you start to impinge on your plumbing code, fixture count. So the base repair would address as much as possible the ADA compliancy, but it might still not be as compliant as a new construction building.
What about the elevators? I know there's an elevator here that's definitely not compliant for ADA.
Yeah, that would be part of the base repair.
All right.
Are there any more questions?
Hi, Glenn Liming, 30 Quaker Lane. Thank you for all your help. I'm not going to tell you any of you are out of your minds tonight, because you're not. You've done a great job, and thank you. With that, soft costs. Once the post-construction's done, bigger facility, more tech, AI, all these grand things, will there be more costs post the construction?
I'll talk about a little bit about like maintenance and systems and things like that affect, you know, those kind of soft costs down the road. And that's why we've introduced things like geothermal and different programs within the mechanical systems to help make them more efficient down the road. Geothermal was one of the best things we could do. It has a slightly higher upfront cost, but the life cycle cost of it is much better. So there's things on that side that with the construction of the building and what we're doing, we can reduce those soft costs down the road. As far as the other educational, I don't touch those things. I let Kirk do that.
In terms of this, there are other soft costs. They're all included within the scope of the project. So the cost of construction, Marianne, is of just the construction is
It's
199 million, with the difference being the soft costs, the contingencies, escalation, all included in that.
I think of the things like maintenance, support, operations, staffing. All this is going to be dealt with, and is it in 27 that all of a sudden, hey guys, we got more money, or going to need more money to keep this going?
It's an interesting question, and I guess prior to being on the select board, I was on the town finance committee and spent a lot of time stewing over the Neshoba budget, even though I had no control of it because I was on the Bolton finance committee. But I couldn't tell you how much the current school is going to cost if nothing's done. I couldn't tell you how much it's going to cost to run this school in 2028. And the relevant question is, how much more or less would a new school cost in 2028? And there's no baseline to answer that with. I'm sorry, but that's where we stand right now.
Go ahead, Ms. Miller, go ahead.
Sheila Millett, a Lancaster resident. I did have a concern. Actually, I have two questions. One is, do all three towns need to vote yes for this project to go through?
Yes.
Thank you. And my other question is regarding accreditation. What happens if, unfortunately, the project wouldn't go through? What are we looking at in terms of, you know, our students and accreditation for the school, and how does that process work? Like, I mean, I realize there's a probationary period, but then kind of what happens after that?
Oh, there it is, okay. You actually heard from me previously on that particular issue, and in that regard, I'm going to turn it over to Superintendent Downing for another perspective on this.
As I've been presenting regarding accreditation, the initial NIAS report coming out in 2015 and then the response in 2017 spoke to the things that we saw earlier in the presentation. We are coming up on our decennial examination of that, and I know that Dr. Boynton actually received a communication just recently that we're beginning to start planning what is the self-study process. In the event that we're not addressing the standards within the NEASC accreditation, we are then at risk of ultimately losing that accreditation. There's a probationary period that would be assigned if we did not meet up to those standards. We had this happen relatively close to us not too long ago in the town of Maynard, where they did not approve a project. They were in that probationary status with NEASC. Ultimately, that was a vehicle that convinced the town that they need to approve that accreditation because I can't give you data, but the stories that were shared with me from real estate agents and other residents of that area were that it impacted the town and impacted the property values there. Not to mention that NEASC is a major accrediting agency that colleges look for in terms of high schools. We produce graduates. Our students come out of here with an excellent education, have performed very well. And in the recent Boston Magazine article, our community has noticed that we were ranked 23rd for high schools in our state, but we were also ranked as the top 10 districts for bang for your buck in terms of cost to educate a student in the state as well. So, you know, what the impact would be if we ultimately were put on probation or lost that accreditation, I can't say to you with definitive terms, other than just to say it's a risk, and it's a real risk to the vitality of the town if that were to happen.
And before I get to you, just want to follow up with this young lady's question. And as I mentioned to you in my email, and I mentioned it on Saturday as well, just for anybody here who's interested, loss of accreditation in Massachusetts at the public high school is not unprecedented. I think the most famous one that I can think of is Lawrence. Lawrence lost their accreditation a number of years ago. And as I mentioned on the tour on Saturday, that Jeff Riley, who's the current commissioner of the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, was the individual who was appointed receiver for the Lawrence Public School Department back in the day. And I think that his job that he did in Lawrence is what catapulted him to the position of state education commissioner. But go ahead, ma'am, go ahead and ask his question.
So I was here during the term.
Could you move to the microphone, please?
So my name's Lisa Nielsen. I live in Stowe. I was here during the tour over the weekend. And one of the things that they talked about is that the new school, if we decided to vote for it, would be solar ready. But that didn't count in part of in the final bill, the cost for solar. So are we going to be asked, a couple years down saying, hey, we need to put solar in now, we're required because of the green building, code, that we have to now buy solar, and how much is that going to cost?
So, the Green Buildings Program at the MSBA does not require solar. It requires us to meet certain criteria for the new specialized code, new specialized energy code at the state level, which essentially is as close to net zero as you can get. We would not get net zero without some solar in the building. What we've done in the past is that we found that we're solar ready, and that we're providing the conduit, the infrastructure, the panel boards, the stuff like that, the structure of the roof to support solar. But what we found in the past is that the program to get it is much more economical to do through the district directly with a supplier. And that usually ends up being sort of like a lease program, almost like you get if you did it on your own house. It's not economical for the school to actually own the depreciating product. It's more economical for the school to have it as something that they're leasing and selling electricity back. So that's the reason it's not in the estimate right now, is because we're providing the infrastructure to install it, but the program to do that would be something that would be negotiated between the district and whoever the vendor or the utility would be.
Okay.
But we would, encourage that to happen, and that's what we provided the infrastructure.
Okay. And then when I was looking up the, kind of our ranking in Massachusetts, I didn't come up with our ranking being so hot. I thought, as I'm looking through the rank, I came up with 60 is what our school, our regional high school went for. Where I'm looking at all these other schools like AMSA, who's way up there compared to us. They're in buildings without any, with leaking roofs, similar to this, but they're in office buildings and things like that. I mean, what is this going to do to help our students or our ranking? Because people don't look at the schools, they're looking at what our rankings are. If you're going to go move into a town before you even start looking, you're not driving by the high school to see what it looks like. You're looking at what's the ranking, how many kids are in there. How many kids now are not coming to our schools anymore and are going to private schools? My son went 2 years to a private school, and he would have stayed there for 4 years if it was up to me. But he begged me to come back to Neshoba, and he didn't have a great experience, unfortunately. And the quality of the education, some of the teachers are super fantastic. I would rather see us spend our money on the teachers and the education that kids are getting than to spend it on the buildings. Get our buildings so they're decent, but that's a huge nut for people to have to pay. I have many friends who are here in both Stowe and Bolton who are they're lifelong residents who've grown up here, have taken over their parents' homes, and now are in their 70s looking, where am I going to move to next? Because I can't afford the taxes anymore, and they can't get assessments, and they're panicking because if this comes through, this is more than what they're getting in their Social Security. Most of these people are single people who don't have a spouse, who they're on single Social Security and can't afford it. So I'd hate to see the character of our towns just become all young people and no older people, because that's how it's going to end up, where a lot of people are moving. And with all those moves, our tax assessments are going to go up because it's all paper, paper increases here of what they're assessing our houses on, which, if the market keeps going up, that's all well and good, but it's not anything in your pocket until you sell. So I just would like to see, I'd like to see how this is affecting us now.
So what I can share with you are just some statistics we know locally. Since 2018, in our towns, just over 2%, 2.07% of our students went to vocational tech. That has doubled in 5 years. So when we look at tuitions of $41,000 a student that are happening in all three of our towns, that coincides with the development onset of the Minuteman Regional Technical High School and the programming that went with it. Just in the town of Stowe went from sending, what was it, I want to get this right. We went from, in that same period of time, sending 15 students in 2018 to this past year, we sent 65 students. And so at a rate of $41,000 a student, it's dramatic. And a major piece of feedback that we've received from that family is the facility of which those children are being educated is far superior to what could be offered here in the Neshoba Regional School District, and that translates in real dollars.
New school. That was not like that forever, and kids aren't going to that Minuteman because of what the school is. They're now going to Minuteman because they're finding that the price of college is so high that people are trying to now go into the trades so that they don't have to pay for a college education where they can get one through the Minuteman and through all those other areas instead of coming to a high school and actually going out and getting a job.
The feedback I've received, particularly from the residents of Stowe, is that with the onset of that building and their engineering and computer science tracks matched up with the educational experience of their families, and they thought that their children would be able to go into college and technical college aspects in those fields with greater likelihood of having gone to Minuteman than this high school.
Well, I know a bunch of the parents whose kids just graduated, and most of them are going into trades, and then some of the kids have done the electronics things and have not decided to go on to college and are working for Tesla, so that they don't need to even go on. They can just go from there into careers, which is great. But I could pay $21,000 and send my kid to St. John's and get an education where they come out and well prepared for college and, are ready to go, where I'm seeing here that my kid was not a model student and became demotivated the longer he was here. And so it would be nice to see how you take care of the kids who are at the top, but the kids who are at the middle or bottom who are struggling, those kids kind of get overlooked. So I'd like to see how you're going to, though, improve education for wanting people to come here than to go elsewhere, because I do know quite a few families who decided to send their kids starting at even middle school and out of the region, and are sending them to private schools because they feel they're getting a better education.
Yeah, and I hear you on that completely. And I think that's part of what we talked about in the educational visioning sessions around this high school, and offering students the opportunities to get involved in project-based learning opportunities, innovation practices, and collaboration practices that are going to encourage and target them in that way. And when we have classrooms of 725 square feet, and some of those classrooms reaching that threshold of 24 students, the space doesn't allow for those kind of activities. So we're looking for the versatility in what we can do in those educational spaces moving forward. So as we look at this project, it's not one singular item, it is a collection. It's every matchstick has weight. And when added up and all those pieces put together, that's the total weight of the decision that's in front of us. And so we just have to remember all those pieces.
So Parker School over in Fort Devens is a charter school. My two nephews and a niece all went there. It's all project-based. They are in an old building that probably doesn't, I'm not sure if it makes any of the requirements nowadays, but it's all project-based, it's all group learning, but it's not like this. And there's not, they get along great and they get a great education, but it's very different, and it's a different type of learning, and not all kids, it's not a traditional type, and it's very difficult for someone who's looking to go on to college and to get, who's more apt to do more of the less project work and to get the work done, to work in that environment.
Yeah,
But that's just my thoughts.
That's a
after
wonderful
seeing it.
school that you cited.
It is, and
certainly.
we've had kids who, now my oldest nephew's 26, has been out, went to Clark. I have a niece who's, I have another one who just graduated from Binghamton, who went from Parker to Binghamton. He had the right background, but had a really hard time fitting into a real, like a college setting where they don't do the collaborative, that they're working and they're having, having the regular college experience. It was very hard for him to get used to doing a project, coming from a project-based environment to, to a college setting where you're doing lectures and things like that. So it's I think you need a mixture of everything.
I couldn't agree with you more. Having a diverse amount of experiences in an educational program is critically important. That is true.
It's okay. Anybody else?
No. All right, so I want to thank everybody for coming here this evening. It's been over 2 hours, and I think that's the longest of our forums that we've had. So even though we didn't have a huge crowd, I want to thank everybody for their questions. The one thing I would leave you with in relation to this project is that one of the things that I've been doing as the chair is I've sort of been monitoring what's been going on in the town of Stoneham. And if you go back and look at, and the town of Stoneham does an excellent job of keeping their citizenry apprised of the progress of their particular build project. Stoneham is a significantly smaller school than this, but I think if you go back and you look at the costs attended to that project and the increase in costs that they incurred and the repercussions thereof, I think you'll see that what we're suggesting is really right within the wheelhouse. And credit to our designers and our OPM. And on that, I'll leave you with good night, and thank you for coming.